honor to God for allowing me to be here today and allowing me to share some thoughts with you all.
All right.
Lee Street is, I always say, it's kind of my adopted home church. I grew up going to my father's family's church, Morning Star, which is right down the street. And those days, my aunt was the pastor. My whole life, you know, when you're a child, your life is, you don't realize how small your life is.
Well,
And my whole life pretty much consists of about a 4-block radius. I grew up 2 blocks over. My aunt, Geneva, and all the various family members she mentioned were right next door. The end of that street was Lee Street, and I pretty much lived down here playing basketball and going to the summer camps. Where's Teresa Brown? I saw Teresa Brown gave me my first job. It felt like a big responsibility. Some of my responsibilities, I was getting orange juice out of the fridge, handing that out. Just take the trash out. Used to line the kids up for kickball. So those were, major responsibilities. Something to prepare me for what I'm doing now.
all right.
And then my home church was right down the street. So most of what I know about the world, I learned at one of those 4 places. And I'm eternally grateful to everybody who had a part in that. My parents, my sisters, Reverend Johnson. We're all
That's all right. That's all right.
Take your time, Dave.
Sometimes people look at you and they see that you have been blessed to accomplish some things. And the instinct is to talk about how great you are. And I need everyone here to understand that I'm a product 100% of grace. There's nothing more than that, nothing less than that, grace.
Yes, sir.
So, I want to start our discussion today in an interesting place. I'm actually going to start it in 2008, because I'm only 32 years old. And I wasn't around for some of the things that took place in what we view as sort of the civil rights movement, though we know it's something wrong. I was not born at that time, not even thought of at that time. So I'm going to start in 2008. 2008 was an interesting year for me. It was a year of transition for me. It was a year I graduated from college from Virginia Tech. Graduated that December. And I did something about a month earlier that I had never done before. I'd never done it because I'd never been old enough to do it. And I'd never done it because I'm not sure I'd ever had really the interest in doing it.
Well,
About a month before that, I put on my blazer. Remember what I had on, Michael Jesse? I put on my tan blazer, and I put on a nice blue button-down shirt with a nice pair of jeans. And I walked down to the Blacksburg Public Library, and I voted. And that was the first time I had voted. And I remember the sense of pride that I felt voting at that time. I got my I voted sticker. I was on top of the world because at my age, I didn't have a Selma. I didn't have a March on Washington. I didn't have these things. And so that was my time to stand up
yes, sir.
and be accountable,
Yes, sir.
exercise my civic duty, and do something that I felt was for the betterment of not just myself, but for
Right.
many other people.
Yes, yes.
Now, I'm not at liberty to divulge who I voted for. But I will say that when President Obama was elected, I realized something. I realized that I was not dreaming big enough.
Well,
I never really thought about being an attorney to that point, and that's probably because I had never seen an attorney that looked like me. When I was growing up here, I graduated Virginia High in 2004. I never even had a classroom teacher that looked like me. Now, you might wonder, Don, what does 2008 have to do with Martin Luther King?
Right.
Well, in a word, everything.
All right.
It has everything to do with Martin Luther King. Because I'm not sure I would have existed as a college student without Martin Luther King, and I certainly know we wouldn't have had our first black president without Martin Luther King. Imagine this is a black college student, first time ever voting, going to the polls to where there is a black major candidate in a general election. This had never happened before. It was a special time for me, but I got to reflecting on that and just kind of thinking about the elections since. You know, it's naturally I've become a regular voter. I voted in midterms. I voted in the general election, as I hope you all did.
That's right.
And I thought about 2012. 2012, I was in law school in Durham, and I went to the Durham Public Library and I voted. And it was special, but it wasn't quite the same. I wouldn't say I was going through the motions, but I went and voted and did what I was supposed to do, and I got my sticker, and I went home and studied, because that's what you do in law school. You study, and you drink lots of coffee. Some people drink lots of other things, but you definitely study and drink lots of coffee. And I thought about 2016, and by the time 2016 had come around, voting was just like time machine. It's election day, me and my wife go vote, and that's that. Didn't really mean anything. And I got to thinking, that sort of is the irony of progress. Progress, you pray for it, you dream about it, you fight for it. And then when you get in it, you've had it a little while, you kind of start to take it for granted.
Lord have mercy. Lord have mercy.
Those that were on the front lines, they kind of get forgotten.
Right.
Sometimes people may view their methods as being out of touch. At least I think that is something that my generation is at times guilty of. So I say all that to segue into our discussion, and it centers around three sub-themes. The first sub-theme, and I hope you will catch this as we talk, is just gratitude.
All right.
It's gratitude first and foremost to God for working through Dr. King and for working through many others. It's gratitude for God working through people like Reverend Johnson. Amen. The things that he's put in place and done in this community, that if I can't speak for anybody else, I can speak for myself and say,
all right.
All right.
Yes. Amen.
My second theme is mastery of self. Mastery of your emotions.
Amen.
That's an essential theme to Dr. King's movement, a nonviolent movement. And then my third sub-theme, and this sort of takes on a theological bit, appointed timing. We're going to talk about that a little more later.
All right.
Now, my overall theme kind of comes from, if you follow sports, I follow sports. You follow entertainment. Every time this iconic figure comes along, people say, who would be the next? People say, who will be the next Michael Jordan? Who will be the next LeBron James? Who will be the next Michael Jackson? And so our overall theme is, who will be the next Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.?
All right, John. All right.
I remain fascinated by King's philosophy of nonviolent resistance, and I think it important to note that he was not the originator of this approach.
Well,
We know that he studied Mahatma Gandhi's concept of satyagraha, which literally means truth force. It's a form of civil resistance that emphasizes non-cooperation and an immoral government. King even made a pilgrimage to India in 1959. We know that Gandhi got many of his concepts from studying a man named Henry David Thoreau.
well,
Now, I wasn't sure to the extent you were familiar with Thoreau. He's not someone that's talked about as much in this context, and so I just wanted to give you a flavor of who he was and what he was about. In 1846, the United States declared war against Mexico. Now, many abolitionists in the North viewed this as a plot to expand slavery into the southwestern territories. Now, Henry Thoreau, he'd already stopped paying his taxes in protest of slavery. But at this point, he actually took a public stance against the Mexican-American War as well. And as a result of his not paying taxes in protest, he was put in prison. And he was bailed out after one day by an anonymous donor. To this day, there's conflict as to who that was. We don't know if that was a family member. We don't know if that was some of his wealthy friends or politicians. We don't know who paid that fee. But What we do know is that after that point, he gave a speech, which eventually became an essay called Civil Disobedience. And I would just like to read you a passage from that essay, Civil Disobedience. When a sixth of the population of the nation, which has undertaken to be the refuge of liberty, are slaves, and a whole country, that country being Mexico, is overrun and conquered by a foreign army and subjected to military law, I think that it is not too soon for an honest man to rebel and revolutionize. Now, this was in 1848, so this is 13 years before the Civil War. This is 17 years before the 13th Amendment was ratified on December 6th of 1865. And so I start there because I want to emphasize that Dr. King's philosophy was one that came as a result of careful planning and deliberation. I think we do a disservice to not only Dr. King, but to the civil rights movement as a whole when we reduce it to just emotion.
Yeah.
It's not just an emotional response to something. That was one aspect of it, but that was not the whole of it. Dr. King was aware he could not simply guilt America into changing its policies. There had to be force, however, that force did not have to be violent. And King understood this because he studied others. There's even some evidence that early on King bore some skepticism as to the value of nonviolent protest. But in studying others, he came to believe that that was the only effective way to bring about change in this country. Now, what fascinates me the most about a philosophy of nonviolence is that it's not intuitive to most people. At least it's not intuitive to me. I think most folks, well, let me speak for Don. Let me not speak for most folks. Me, myself, when I'm offended by someone, my first instinct is to return the favor. My first instinct is to make you feel just as bad as you made me feel. Or worse. I thought about why we do this. Well, we do this because it's cathartic. We do this because it makes us feel better for that fleeting moment. Someone's made us feel small and they've belittled us, and we're taking back control by telling them off. We're taking back control by conducting ourselves in some way that's less than who we would typically be. But we're making our point. And I thought about this and reflected on it, and something came to me that Dr. King certainly understood, and I think that is the crux of this movement, and that is, if you cannot control yourself, you cannot control your emotions, you cannot direct your response to provocation, then you cannot, and you will not, successfully lead anyone or anything. You will be nothing more than a guide to destruction. Now the Bible speaks to this. As Christians, we are instructed to turn the other cheek, but we oftentimes act differently. We even oftentimes teach our children to act differently. And I think that is partly because we have a misunderstanding of why the Bible instructs us to turn the other cheek. So I thought about this, and I'm going a little off script. But when we turn the other cheek, it's really not for the other person. It's not actually for the person that's offended us. We turn the other cheek, that's for you.
Hallelujah.
And you know, I kind of laugh because it took me 30 years to get there. I'm thankful it took me 30 as opposed to 50 or 60. The reason it's for you is because when you do not turn the other cheek, you leave yourself susceptible to certain spiritual attacks. Certain things take root in your spirit, and you can't shake them as easily. I think a good example of that, as an attorney, is the concept of a crime of passion. And I'm sure you all have heard the term crime of passion. I'll give you a little bit of legal theory on where that comes from. What a crime of passion is, quite literally, is a state of temporary insanity. The court has put a doctrine in place that says there are certain things that will inflame a reasonable person such that they are in a state of temporary insanity. They don't know what they're doing. They have literally lost their mind. And when we find that that comes up, it's most often in cases where there's been some sort of terrible assault or maybe even a murder. And oftentimes after the person comes to their senses, they recognize that whatever action they took was disproportionate to whatever the actual offense was. And I got to thinking about why that is. Well, my thinking, if they would have stopped, if they would have stepped back for a moment, if they would have examined themselves in that moment, maybe they would have taken a better position. But when you are not a master of your emotions, and when you do not turn the other cheek, that spirit of anger takes root in you and it manifests itself in hate, manifests itself in rage. And before you know it, you have done something that you didn't even realize you were capable of.
Amen.
Now, this is an important concept to understand in light of nonviolent resistance, because Dr. King understood this. He understood that we cannot build a lasting movement that is rooted in rage and anger.
Yeah.
And that's because anger is about the most counterproductive emotion you possibly have. And to give you an example of that, I'm going to give you a personal story. I'm kind of embarrassed to tell it, but I'm going to tell it because we family. I had twins in October, praise God, and about a month ago, I was cooking dinner. Anybody that's got children know you do not sleep in those early stages. And I was exhausted. I've had babies yelling at me all day, so I decided we need to eat something. I ain't eaten nothing all day, and my wife's with the baby, so I said, I'm going to cook some chicken. So I took a glass Pyrex dish, and I seasoned some chicken up really well. It's a recipe I've done before. It's actually quite good. And I put it in the oven, and I baked my chicken. And my chicken sort of produced a little bit of juice, a little glaze. And that glaze kind of oxidized on the bottom. I thought, man, that might be good to put that over the chicken. So I got this thought in my mind. It made a lot of sense at the time that I was going to take this piping hot Pyrex dish out of the oven. Now hold on before, let me give you a sense of my kitchen. So my kitchen, I've got my stove top is here. And then there's a couple countertops in my pantry area or cabinet area. And then behind me is an island, and the island's got sink in it and trash disposal and that sort of thing. So I decided to take this piping hot Pyrex out of the oven. I'm just going to put just a little bit of water in it. That was just a little bit to break up some of that glaze, and then we're going to put that glaze on the rice, and we're going to put it on the vegetables and the chicken. It's going to be something to write home about. Took that hot Pyrex dish out of the oven and put it under the faucet.